Welcome back to another episode of the Cosmic Business Breakthrough. I am also welcoming back my wonderful, amazing guest, Kristy Gray. And today we are going to dive into a little bit of a more vulnerable topic, all related to business. Everything, as we talked about before we started recording, everything personal also relates to our business. But the asteroid Chiron is something that a lot of people are curious about. It's something that can come up in client sessions a lot. It's not one of the major planets, but it does have such a huge impact on us. And it is one of those kind of touchier points in the chart. So I'm really excited to have Kristy here today to talk more about how we can embrace Chiron and, work with that energy more to create healing, not only for ourselves, but healing for others that we work with in our business, and kind of embrace the vulnerability that Chiron can bring to us. So tell me about your, understanding of Chiron, even how you first came to kind of, look into it, or what kind of at first. It's not usually the first thing that we look at in our astrology chart, right? But what drew you into this mystical part of the chart?
Well, I have to say, Chiron is such a significant piece of my astrological puzzle. But even when I started understanding my natal chart, I don't think I understood the enormity of Chiron and its significance. And it wasn't until I had a really life-altering Chiron transit that I actually realized how much Chiron is a part of who I am, and also was the missing link in my life as well. So to give you some insight as to my interpretation of Chiron and how I started working with this asteroid, and I'll take you on a journey of the transit that took place and also where Chiron resides in my chart. Is
awesome.
Chiron in Greek mythology is a centaur, and Chiron actually has a very traumatic story. And essentially, Chiron is known as the wounded healer. He is a healer and a teacher. However, he could learn and teach and heal other people, but he had trouble being able to do that for himself. And so essentially, in our natal chart, it's how we turn our pain into power, how we embrace our shadow self, and also how do we face our limiting beliefs. I say Chiron looks like a key, and it's our soul lessons that we need to unlock. And for me personally, is I have Chiron conjunct my Midheaven, which is in the 10th house. So your Midheaven is a legacy point in your natal chart, and it's very much about the destiny that you're walking in life. But also because Chiron is in my 10th house, which is public image and career, there's been some really big themes that I've navigated throughout my life. But I suppose to backtrack a little bit is that Chiron really came into my forefront in 2020. So in 2020, COVID aside, I would have navigated this transit. But I had Chiron conjunct my natal moon. And it's so interesting because if I actually go back and have a look at the transits from that year, and the first transit that I experienced was actually in early 2020, and it was around April to May, so just after COVID began. And I had some family issues come to the forefront. Like, I've had quite a strained relationship with my father. We didn't speak for 15 years. I had to kind of step in and support my siblings. And so a lot of the unresolved trauma that was happening in my life. And of course, I was early in business. I was 2 years into business as well. And so I'm still trying to figure out what my role is in the world. And also my business took off as astrology in 2020, and I was still resisting it. So there's lots of pieces of the puzzle. So my personal life is very ingrained in my professional life, as you mentioned in the beginning. I think it is for all of us. And it didn't really hit me, but I navigated what I could. But it makes sense, right? Moon is always home and family. Now, what happened in October of 2020 when I had the full conjunction from Chiron is those family issues started to come up again, but I had actually lost my will to live. So, and I speak about this really openly because I think it's really important, because I didn't actually know the significance of what was happening at the time. It didn't matter how much meditation I did, how much energy I poured into my business, how much I was eating healthy. I felt like the world was crumbling around me and I couldn't put my finger on what was happening. And I was grasping at straws. I was looking at my natal chart, trying to understand everything. And sometimes we actually have to look beyond ourselves. And this is when I started diving into Melanie Reinhart's work. She has an amazing book that I recommend to everyone interested in Chiron, known as Chiron and the Healing Journey. And I actually didn't know this at the time, but I had a huge amount of activations that were also occurring that were being triggered by Chiron. I actually ended up going to the doctor and trying to figure out what was happening. I actually thought I was navigating depression. And what I ended up finding out was that my iron levels were really low. So I'd been put on iron medication a year before because my iron levels were 20 mcg. And after being on iron supplementation for a year, that actually dropped to 15 mcg. And so that's actually not a healthy state to be navigating in. But the reason I'm sharing this with you, total tangent, it sounds like, but it's actually not, because it's all been triggered by Chiron. My moon's in Aries. Aries is ruled by Mars. Mars rules iron. My iron deficiency came from that Chiron activation, but I was also dealing with the family trauma because Chiron's in such a significant placement in my natal chart. That's why I felt like my world was crumbling, because my health was depleted, my family bonds were depleted, and I felt like business felt depleted too. And it's only because of the work I've been doing, diving into Kira Sutherland's work, who's an amazing medical astrologer, that I actually started to put all these pieces of the puzzle together. So that is what sparked my curiosity in Chiron, and I can't imagine my life now without working with Chiron in some capacity.
Yeah. Wow. Well, that's fascinating. And that's such an amazing awareness to have about a transit, or about, even what's going on in your own natal chart, when you can go, okay, this is happening and now I understand this. How can I put things in place in my life to work with that, and know that, my iron levels are really going to, need bolstering at this time. That's such a great thing to know. I mean, I know a lot about iron levels, having, just had a baby, and, I also have had very low iron over the times. And it's interesting because I have a lot of difficult Mars in my chart too. So that makes a lot of sense. But tell me more about, like, how you so you move through this from a health perspective as well, which is always related to, we need to be feeling good in our bodies in order to show up and serve and do our best work. But what did you also notice in your own business as you started to kind of embrace Chiron a little bit more? Like, what kind of unfolded for you after that?
So the more I leaned into vulnerability and the more I accepted and integrated my gifts, the more my business flourished. So I'm not sure if I've shared this on your podcast before, but even though I knew astrology as soon as I found it was a part of my life's journey, I resisted it for 2 years. And I dabbled in it, kept it, like, kind of treated it like a side hustle, even though, like, because I had a coaching business originally, and that's kind of what I'd set my sights on. And I remember my astrology mentor, Narelle, she was really pushing me in the astrological direction, which is very Chiron conjunct Midheaven, because like, Chiron's very connected. It's at the top of my chart, and it's connected to so many of the planets in my natal chart. But after that health scare, I and then starting to learn about Chiron and how I could integrate and work with it rather than resist it, everything changed, because I decided in 2021 that I would fully own astrology. I would dedicate my life to this work, which sounds like very self-sacrificing, but it was kind of how I was like having to approach things. I had to go, how can I actually accept this as a part of my journey? And honestly, my business just continued to flourish and to take off, but also I began to trust myself so much more as an astrologer. And I think one thing, like the business has just turned 5, so I can't believe it's
congratulations. That's awesome.
Thank you. And like, if I actually reflect back, like the amount of traction that I've been able to make, but I think more of the confidence I have in my own unique way of working with the stars, like I don't even second guess that now. And I actually have Chiron to thank.
Yeah. Yeah. So it allowed you to kind of see your gift in a way,
100%.
and embrace your gift in a way, and realize that this wounded healer archetype, I guess that's what you're embracing in your own work, is like, yes, I have an element, or, being a wounded healer in some way that is able to share my experience and my knowledge to help others. That's kind of the archetype that you're embracing in your business.
Yeah.
And that is actually what has made it so much more powerful, because you own that instead of being afraid of it. Like a lot of us, we see this symbolism in our chart and it can be kind of intense, right? It can be kind of confronting, because even though I think we know this on a subconscious level, actually acknowledging it, seeing it in the chart, and then actually acknowledging it, taking it on board and going, okay, yes, there is a big part of me that is this, that I, and then owning that part of it, part of yourself. That's a huge kind of and powerful step forward. Instead of spending most of our life, as many of us do, we spend our life avoiding that, like knowing that underneath, but avoiding taking ownership of that part of ourselves, because we're worried we're going to be rejected, or we're worried that it's maybe too confronting for other people, or too confronting for ourselves. But yet you've really just stepped into that, and that is what makes your business so much more successful, more powerful, more authentic, because you're able to do that.
Oh, absolutely. But I want to highlight too, like, it hasn't been easy, because
it's
like
not an easy thing. Yeah.
No, like Chiron in the 10th house, really does point to being even unsure of your path in life, which a great example of that is, like, I was thriving from the outside looking into my corporate career, with the role that I held and the travel that I got to do and the celebrities that I got to meet. But like, I almost felt like people were making decisions for me in my career. Like, I was like, did I actually choose this? And that is very Chiron in the 10th house. It's like you kind of go with the flow because you think that you should be doing that. But then you're like, hang on a minute, like, is this what I'm choosing? And it wasn't actually until I had my leader at the time. And it's so interesting. It's such a significant part of the journey, where she was like, you're always just kind of like, you're just cool. You're just like ready for the next promotion or the next role.
Yeah.
Like, but what do you actually want? And that just changed. That really did change a lot for me, and really did trigger even the series of events. It was one of those cornerstone moments to get me to this place I'm in today. So, it's been interesting. And then, of course, Chiron and Gemini is like, really speaks to a fear or a trauma or a wound around expression, because Gemini is all about how you spread ideas and exchange information. And for me, I felt like at times I was powerless when I was using my voice, which is really interesting because I'm a Leo ascendant and my sun is in the first house. And so I was using my voice, but there were times where, especially when I was younger, where I didn't feel heard. And I've had to really reclaim, again, that authenticity and that power around my self-expression. And look, vulnerability is still something that I'm working with, also because my moon's in the 8th house in Aries. Like, it's not just because of my Chiron placement, but I still struggle between, especially in the online space, between what do I want to share, what is actually serving my community, when do I need to hold back, what's relevant. And so I really check in to actually go, well, what's for the greater good? How can I lean into my Chiron a little bit more?
Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting thing to talk about right now as we're going through some pretty heavy stuff, globally, as well as, in our own country right now. And there's a lot of kind of hesitation about what do I share online? And this episode is not necessarily about the nodes, but I really think there's a lot, about this nodal transit that we're going through right now that is absolutely could not be expressed more obviously through what is going on in the world right now. But it also feels, because of that, like we really do have to be very considerate about what we're sharing and whether or not it is for the greater good, or whether it is, whether we're sharing it from a compassionate place. And we're going to keep, as you and I were talking about before we started recording, because of the way the energy is at the moment with Saturn in Pisces, we have to keep coming back to compassion all the time, and whether what we're doing is being compassionate, is being inclusive, all of that stuff is, we can't, like you said earlier, we can't kind of be detached emotionally from the rest of the world and people suffering and all of that stuff. We're very much feeling it. But at the same time, we have to find a way through it. We have to still, be able to run our businesses and be able to connect with other people and be able to do the work that we're here to do. But at the same time, we can't be detached from everything that we're seeing going on in the world. And I think Chiron is a great kind of archetype to lean back into when you're feeling this kind of energy of, other people suffering, and acknowledge that part of yourself as well, and just work a little bit more gently. How can I work with my clients more gently at this time? How can I work with myself more gently at this time? How can I show myself more compassion, more care? I think that's going to keep coming up for us at least the next kind of year to 18 months. What do you think about that? What have you noticed at least the past few months as we've also been navigating this kind of nodal shift?
Oh, yeah. Like, people are definitely feeling it. And that's why I mentioned to you offline, like, we're like sponges at the moment, with this very Piscean energy, where I think before when there was a lot happening in the world, we could either say what we needed to and then get on with it, or we could participate or contribute, right? But it didn't mean that it wasn't a big topic. It was just the kind of the energy we were navigating. Whereas now we're so receptive to everything that's happening around us. And so
we feel so affected by it. Yeah.
Oh, the enormity is huge. And so, and I don't have the answer for everyone, because I think everyone needs to participate and show up what feels like intuitively good for them. What I would say though is at the moment, I'm acknowledging, I think that's really important, with whether it's with my clients or whether it's online, I'm acknowledging that there's a lot happening in the world right now, but I also know what my role is, and my role is to show up and to empower and to help people to gain a new perspective. And so by giving tools to help on a personal level, which is what I'm here to do, that's going to contribute to their life, because I think you can't pour from an empty cup. So if you can fill your cup, that is going to potentially change a conversation you have, change how you contribute. It's going to create that a ripple effect in the world. And I don't have to have a public opinion on everything, because that's not my role in life, but that doesn't mean I don't contribute behind the scenes. And so I think it's just clearly defining too, like, what's my role, or how do I want to respond, and to show up with love, intention, and compassion. And that just makes things a hell of a lot easier.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, to also just give yourself a few moments, like, to slow it down rather than, jumping into something. I think with the North Node in Aries, we can be a little bit reactive as well. So we're feeling all of this, energy, we're feeling all of this kind of empathy, massive empathy for all of these situations that are happening. And so we can get a little reactive, and we've got to be really careful about, not jumping the gun, I suppose, and just, really being a bit more considerate about how we're working and what we're saying. And I love that, idea of supporting people behind the scenes. I think people need a lot of support right now. I think that is, if you're a healer, or, you're in that kind of metaphysical space, there is so much that we can support people with right now, because there is a lot to be dealt with. But yeah, don't forget, as you say, to fill your own cup first, so that you are in the best position to help other people, because you can't help people if you're in this hyper reactive state. You've got to kind of calm the nervous system a little bit.
Hugely.
And yeah, so that you can then, offer that to other people, offer that regulation to other people. That's really important.
Yeah.
So what other lessons do you have from Chiron? I mean, I guess one of the other awesome thing about Chiron is that he was a teacher, right? And I think, not just a healer, not just a, carrying a wound, which is, the reason Chiron carried a wound, I guess we should, just to be clear, is that Chiron was part God, and kind of not really human, because he's the son of a Titan. He's the son of Saturn, in fact.
Yep.
And the son of Saturn and a sea nymph, or Kronos, not Saturn. That was the Greek word, the Greek name for him. And instead of being violent and savage like other centaurs, he was, wise. He was known for his wisdom. He was known for his knowledge of medicine, hence the healing. And also he was known as a teacher. So what do you notice about yourself and the way that you run your business? If you acknowledge this Chiron archetype, what else comes through you in your business?
Yeah. So one thing that really resonated with me when I read Melanie's book was she referred to Chiron as a shaman. And I've always thought of Chiron as the connector of worlds. And it's so interesting because I remember doing some business design work with a business designer really early on. And we actually created a trope for the brand as I was starting to integrate astrology. And we actually landed on, and I'll share this actually publicly with everyone, I created this trope, which is referred to as like the high priestess in tarot. And, the high priestess is ruled by the moon, which is the connector of worlds. And I always said that my role here is to blend the metaphysical with the physical, to make astrology accessible, to be able to make it feel attainable. So that's why I'm really big on how I share information. I try to make things digestible, but then when I draw you in, I give you the depth. And that's how I see Chiron plays out for me in my world as well. It's about, taking some of these concepts, whether it's celestial bodies, whether it's working with a natal chart, and actually making them really applicable in life. Like, so, okay, and that's why I always say when I'm working with clients is I'm going to give you everything that I see, because I don't want to be a gatekeeper of information. I don't expect you to understand it. but then you know where it comes from. But then I'm also going to tell you how you can apply that. And
Yes.
makes sense, right? I'm a Virgo with a Mercury in Virgo.
Yes.
It's like, this information's great, but like, what do we actually do with it? And that's how I see my Chiron integration like take shape, is like, okay, how can we talk about these things that have held you back? How can we talk about your challenges? How can we talk about the things that make you feel uncertain or unsure of yourself or elicit fear, and actually turn them into a superpower? How do we look at them through a lens where, rather than seeing them as something that you need to repress and move away from, like, think of that as an incredible gift, because that gives you empathy, it gives you heart, it gives you perspective. And I find, because a lot of the people that I connect with, like, they're here to do some incredible work in the world. And so if they suppress Chiron or anything else that is maybe challenging, or a perceived challenge, I call it, in their natal chart, it's just going to make things harder. But I think, again, it's about when you reframe that and go, well, hang on, this is the high vibrational energy of this. You see things through a different lens, and that will then shape your external world, because your internal world has changed.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, it goes back to that same thing earlier, I guess, embracing that part of yourself instead of seeing it as something to be hidden or pushed away. If you can embrace that, then yes, you're going to be, and turn the narrative around, turn the story around in your mind as well. You're going to be you're going to feel so much better, for starters, but also you're going to allow more of yourself to become visible, and therefore, you're going to be more helpful to others. You're going to be more powerful in business. All of that stuff is going to start, like the snowball effect, I guess, of alchemizing the stories and the challenges that might be present in our lives into something that's useful or powerful for other people.
Oh, hugely. Like, and I think too, like the teaching and healing, obviously, but teaching component of Chiron, I think the key thing here, and I know that I shared this before, but I think it's worth touching on again, is Chiron was the wounded teacher and healer who could heal and teach other people, but couldn't heal or teach himself. And I think so many people walk around this world dishing out advice, telling people what to do.
Yes.
But then then they're not actually like practicing what they preach. And I think I was very much like that when I was younger. So I'm not going to pretend that I'm like an angel here. And, I still have to catch myself, but because I'm very good at supporting everybody else in my life, except, I can be sometimes last on that list too. And it's so important to be able to look at how can you heal yourself, or how can you teach yourself, because if you don't use Chiron as a mirror to reflect back to you what does actually need to be healed in order for you to do even greater work, then you're actually putting a limit on your potential.
Yes, that's true. We do have to absolutely look in the mirror and go, what is going on here? Because yes, you have to be able to notice that and get that awareness, and then start working on that, absolutely, to be able to be more helpful to others. And for that, I guess, I don't think that you don't have to be completely healed in order to help other people. It's not about you have to be completely healed to help others. And I think that's a great lesson that Chiron teaches us as well. It's like, you can operate, you can have a wound and still help other people in a powerful way, but you need to be aware that you have that wound as well. And you need to be actively working with that, rather than just trying to cover it up and pretend it's not there. You have to acknowledge that it's there so that you can be more, more effective in the work that you're doing. So what do you think about, so you have Chiron in the 10th house. Where else, I guess, and I've talked about this on other episodes, but I suppose whenever you have a planet in one of the angles, or a planet or an asteroid, a key point in the chart, you either have, especially when you have it in one of those key areas, so the first, the fourth, the seventh, or the 10th house. You can check out my episode on the 12 houses if you want a refresher on this. But I'd love to just, before we wrap this up, to just get your thoughts on, okay, if you have Chiron in one of those key parts of the chart, what is especially important for you to know, sort of start to do, or, to work with that energy?
I love that question. Well, there's kind of two parts to my perspective on this, because I also have a kite in my natal chart, and Chiron is at the top of my kite.
Okay, that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah,
it's a bit of geometry going on there.
Yeah, and Chiron's like my release point at the top of the kite, and so Chiron is the heart of everything for me in this lifetime. But especially when you do have Chiron in a really significant placement, or anything with the angles. And two, because my midheaven's in Taurus at 29 degrees, and then I've got Chiron at 2 degrees of Gemini, I have to be able to integrate both of those energies as well. So, because both of those constellations, they create, an entirely new archetype on their own, is really understanding, I think, first the significance of that point and working with that before then integrating that additional energy. And so for me, is all of the attributes that come along with having a Taurus midheaven, and knowing that and understanding that, and knowing that everything that I'm going to do in life is going to be very intentional. It's going to be on my own timeline. I'm here to run a marathon and not a race. That is very much like how I operate.
I'm very Taurus. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. It's like so textbook. It's wild. But then also knowing that the more vulnerable that I become, and the more I let people in, and it actually makes me quite emotional to talk about that as well, the more that it actually helps. But it's hard because I have to integrate both parts of myself, the light and the dark, the yin and the yang, and I probably feel it even more.
Interesting though that the Chiron in the 10th also represents the father.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And I think I definitely alluded to that in the beginning. And look, I'm so open to share and talk openly that a lot of my perceived limitations, and where I've held myself back, or I've not given myself permission to shine, has been because of the absence of the relationship with my father. And it's so interesting, because in 2020, when I was going through this big Chiron transit, he gave me some words, and that I'd actually been waiting for my entire life. And it was so interesting because they didn't hold the weight that I always thought they would. And so I've got so much love and appreciation. Like, we don't have like a normal relationship, but I send him love and light all the time, and I've healed so much from that. But it's so interesting because you still carry those wounds in life with you, even when you've found radical self-acceptance, or you've practiced forgiveness, and you have like full-bodied embodiment forgiveness. But that's still a part of you. And so I think it's not about, that's why I said you can't ignore it. You have to integrate it, because it's a part of your story and your journey.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You have to. And when it's in that such a prominent position as well in your chart, like, you can't ignore that. But again, you're embodying that Chiron archetype, because you've got the wound, like, you're aware of the wound and you're working with it. Even though even though you're working on healing it, it's always there. It's not like you can get rid of it. You can't make it go away. It's there. You just have to kind of work around it in a way, work with it and use it in a way that's going to kind of like transmute that energy in some way for other people, which is what you do so beautifully in your work. So
Thank you.
That's awesome.
Mm.
So so if you have, like, for instance, Chiron in the 7th house, you might have a wound around relationships, for instance. Is that what you would kind of interpret? And this doesn't mean, I guess I don't want people to take away, having Chiron somewhere doesn't mean that, like, especially in the 7th, it doesn't mean that you can't have a good relationship or anything like that. It just means there might be a part of you that is somehow carrying this wound around partnership. And that could be, literally, you had a partner, a very difficult breakup, or you had experienced that from, watching your parents had a difficult marriage or something like that. There could be another reason that you have that Chiron in that part of the chart. And that might express itself in that you can help people who are in relationships. You can work with that wound and help people overcome their own wounding in relationships. Is that how you see that Chiron energy playing out in the chart?
It's so interesting, because I actually have had a few clients recently with Chiron in the 7th house. And, I never will offer up, dish out information without kind of trying to understand first if it's even something relevant to tackle.
Yes.
But there was one particular person that I'm thinking of, and I was like, so tell me, what happened? Tell me a little bit about your relationships. Like, I'd love to, because that was one of the things that she wanted to talk about. And I said, has there been a bit of has there been a bit of a friction point for you throughout this lifetime? And she was just like, that again, I just asked the right question and it just opened up the floodgates. And, I think that's what we tend to see with Chiron, and also depending on what it's connected to is the house that it resides in. And this is what I love about astrology, and for anyone that's listening, is you can now start exploring your own natal chart and having a look at where Chiron is, because I love the houses in astrology. I just they're so integral. I love everything, but the houses for me, I'm just so drawn to working with them. And, when you look at that house placement, say, for instance, the 7th house, which rules all forms of contracts. So that's whether that's a business partnership, your intimate partnership, even a friendship, because we hold contracts pretty much with most people we connect with.
Yes.
Is that can be somewhat of a challenge. Maybe you weren't accepted when you were younger by a friendship group, or maybe there was a time where you felt a sense of rejection within a relationship. And what tends to happen is that you carry that with you. And so that's a beautiful opportunity to look at, well, what am I carrying? And also what is what is actually mine to bear in this? What role did I play? Because I think a lot of the time, especially with Chiron, again, that mirror, we reflect back to ourselves, we're the problem, we did something wrong. And, sometimes it can be something externally that actually, or an event or a person that triggered something. And, we feel like we have to carry that, and we don't.
No.
And you can choose, what's yours to bear, and also how you can decide how you want relationships to be. Because what tends to happen, right, is we'll overcompensate. So say, for instance, for example, it will be I was rejected in a relationship. So when I show up in relationships moving forward, I'm going to do whatever I can to either keep this relationship going or, I'm going to pour energy into this. But it takes two to tango. You've got to make sure that people can meet you halfway. And I definitely see that with the nodal axis at the moment too. It's there needs to be that balance between independence and connection in a relationship. You have to both.
Yeah. It is such an interesting time for relationships. Yes. All kinds of relationships, business, personal, all of that stuff. So what about in the first house? Let's look at that.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, because So I definitely have had some beautiful souls I've been connecting with for years now that have Chiron in the first, and also Neptune, which is actually another interesting one for another day. But so you have Chiron in the first house, don't you?
Yes, I do.
So I'll share some information, and then I would love your thoughts on this as well.
Sure.
Because the first house is the house of self, the house that represents our expression, our identity, and I suppose, like, to say it in a heart-centered way, is there has probably been a lot of times throughout life where you might have lost your sense of self, or felt that your identity was wrapped up outside of yourself. Or also there was an unsure of who you are and your role in this lifetime too. And that it's so important to cultivate a sense of empowerment and confidence, especially in business, because otherwise it's easy to look outside of yourself and go, and I'd imagine too, exploring astrology and find like the work that you do in the world would have just like opened up all that. But I'd love your thoughts. Like, how's Chiron in the first shown up for you in this lifetime?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you've nailed it, of course. You know, having a lost sense of self, I think, is definitely a story that I noticed, and this is kind of the story that I tell about how I got into astrology in the first place, was because I'd lost myself and I'd forgotten, I'd gotten wrapped up in an identity that wasn't really mine, and I think, looking back, I can see that pattern playing out over my lifetime, where I tried to do things so that I would fit in rather than acknowledge who I was and what I really wanted. I did the things so that I would be the right kind of a person, not the person that I was. And it wasn't until I found astrology that I really went, oh, okay, now I get it. This makes sense to me. This is actually who I've been trying to be all this time. But I kept trying to, I was trying to be, but at the same time I was trying to be someone else, if that makes sense. And I think, there's also a wound around, with Chiron, the not enoughness wound plays out a lot in that scenario. Like, it is a wound of yourself. So you will always feel a little bit inadequate, like, I'm not, just being me is not good enough, And I see that with my clients as well, who have strong Chiron, especially around that identity sector. But that's why, like you, we can acknowledge that, right? We can go, okay, yes, that's why I attract people who need that kind of development of self. In a way, I was just connecting with a client this week who was talking about going through a brand crisis. And a lot of my clients come to me with a brand crisis because they're going through a personal transformation and they no longer know who they are, what they want to be. And I'm like, this is my life experience, I need to rework out who I am and who I want to be, and, how to feel good in that. Is, having a Taurus Chiron as well is very much about the physical body too, the physical sense, and how you navigate and how you manifest physical things in life. So yeah, gosh, it's like it's a big one. It's a big one for a not a planet as a big a big impact on us.
Well, do you know what? Like, Chiron's its orbit is really interesting because Chiron orbits between Saturn and Uranus. So if you even think of that, right, where Chiron sits, there's this kind of like authoritative influence around you actually need to do some work. That's that Saturn feeling. And then the Uranian is that like rebel
authenticity as well. Yeah.
Which is wild. Yeah. So I always think of that influence, but that's also what makes you so good at what you do, because Chiron's in such a significant placement in your natal chart, because you've had to, again, you've got to walk through the fire essentially to then be able to come to a place where you can assimilate all the knowledge that you've acquired, and then be able to give those gifts to other people.
Yeah, and it is the truth that the most difficult parts of our chart are our superpowers, right? Like that is where we can do the most beneficial work for ourselves and for other people that we serve is look at where the most tricky parts of your chart are. That's where the gold is. Yes, absolutely. So yeah, I've loved this. This has been a very vulnerable chat, hasn't it? I mean, you can't really talk about Chiron without it being a bit of a intense conversation. So I would encourage anyone listening to go and check out Kristy's stuff. Amazing work. And is there anything that you want to direct people to? Do you have any specific resources or anything happening at the moment that you want to share?
No, I only would recommend, like, if you're interested in diving into Chiron, that's why I highlighted that book in the beginning.
Yeah, I'll link to that in the show notes. Yes.
Amazing.
I have read another book on Chiron. Is it The Rainbow Bridge? Something like that.
Okay.
So, but I don't think I've read Melanie's book yet, so I'll have to check that out. But it was interesting how you were talking about that, because being the bridge, Chiron is the bridge, right, as well. Like, so yes, it can be a really interesting and powerful placement to explore. Look at the house that it's in, look at the sign that it's in, and look at, if you understand your chart, look at the aspects that it's making. As Kristy's talked about, in her chart, it's making a lot of aspects to a lot of things, and that means that it's really critical in your work in the world as well. And obviously, it's best to go and chat to an astrologer if you want to know how it's all connected, because it can be a bit of a minefield and a bit overwhelming to try and do it yourself. So definitely encourage you to check that out. But thank you so much for this amazing chat and for sharing your story with us, your beautiful story. And yeah, I hope that I know people will get a lot out of hearing that, and a lot of kind of, I guess, strength from your story, because it is, embracing that wound in our own life. Those wounds is really important to us finding our potential. So thank you for your courage and for your time. Love you very much. And
love you too, honey.
Till next time, we will chat again.